native Missourian. He received his BS from Missouri S&T, at that time it was UMR, with graduate work at UMC. His Master's of Divinity is from Trinity School for Ministry, as is his further work on his doctorate for ministry. Now, prior to ordination, Father Carl worked in various aspects of the building industry before founding his own commercial contracting firm. He left a successful business and active involvement in church and civic affairs to enter into the ordained ministry on a full-time basis. Father Carl served in the Episcopal Diocese of Pittsburgh and Tennessee until he was called to Springfield as the first rector, senior pastor of All Saints Anglican. He currently serves St. Thomas Anglican as rector and the Diocese of Cana East as archdeacon. Put your hand together to welcome a man of God, the Reverend Carl Iver.
Maybe this will work. Is that going to help? Can you all hear it? No? All right. How's that? Okay. Which one? This thing? Leave it to the clergy to be difficult. Those of you who've been in any of the teachings that I've done, I mean, Pat's carried the load for your spirituality classes, but you know that I'll continue to mess with my classes on. Well, thank you very much, and we're so glad to be here tonight. They've given me 9 whole minutes to tell you about CORE's impact on the community. Yeah, that's 1 minute. My wife is timing me. She always times me when I'm doing sermons. And when I know I'm running long, I can look over there and I get this great support from my wife. And she is a true support. She'll be sitting there and she'll gently say, in the words of my New Testament professor, land this baby. But 90 minutes would be a much better time and a more appropriate amount of time if I was to detail some of the benefits that are the direct result of recovering lives from addiction for a community. Now, think about it. I could talk for 20 or 30 minutes alone just on the reduction in cost for illegal activities and all of the things that run from them. Easy 20 minutes, okay? I could speak about increased productivity in the economy. Who doesn't do a better job when they are stone cold sober as opposed to being higher than a guy? That's easy. This is not difficult math. Even the government knows this stuff. It wasn't meant to be political. Yeah. I could talk about the decreased drag on our tax structure that we all contribute to. That would be boring. These are considerable costs to any community. They're little noticed, and worse than that, they're less discussed. However, on a less financial note, and certainly more important impact, my time, limited as it is, could be spent reminding you of the countless small daily contributions to the civil society, in the schools, the churches, the volunteer, the interest groups, all the little things that make our society and our culture and our community that we live in a place worth living in. It's all the little things that help make life worth living. And these are the things that are made by the recovering lives of meaning. But then these are things which I hope you all are already somewhat familiar with. I know certainly I was, long before I ever heard of Church Army, now Corps. And it's been a long time since I knew about Church Army. Instead, what I'd like to do is spend the remainder of my time on a somewhat neglected aspect, although Carrie proceeded to steal most of my thunder. That's the thing about preachers. They tend to steal each other's ideas. But it's a neglected aspect of Corps' impact on any community. Anytime you have a group that's dedicated the way this one is, purposed the way this one is, especially since it is a clear distinctive of Corps' mission, meaning, and purpose. And Corey alluded to that just briefly. And what is that clear impact, that distinctive? It is Corps' testimony to the reasons it offers hope. The reasons it offers hope. Not only to those whose lives have fallen into addiction. I will remind those of you who have not heard me before, no one ever stood up in the morning and said, you know what, I'm going to spend the rest of my life stoned. You just don't do it. I never once, when I was working in the VA, found anyone who assumed that that's what they were going to do with their lives. But not only do you serve the lives of people who are coming out of addiction, but to those also who assume that the community that they exist in will flourish if and only if the right mix of resources are supplied and applied in a generally agreeable manner. Many people live their lives thinking that things are just fine because for them they are just fine. But they forget that there's a reason for hope. So they don't really need it right then. Yet any number of you here have and will testify that when the spiritual aspects of life are ignored, the community will suffer even as much as the individual has. Is that not true? Do not our communities fall apart as we fall apart from the inside? We rot from the inside. And no amount of topical treatment, be it physiological or psychological, and this is Carrie was making a point, more drugs for more drugs, it doesn't work. There are statistics to back that up, that it doesn't work. Nothing from that realm can substitute for the one thing, the reason for the hope that Corps gives. The reason should sound very familiar out of 1 Peter, able to give a reason for the hope of the gospel, which is the basis not only of your recovery, but also of your hope. And I can easily say the same thing for myself. It is the basis of my recovery. And also the basis of my hope. Therein lies Corps' lasting impact on the community. Not merely a reduction in costs connected with addiction, as real as they are, as damning as they can be, but in its continuing testimony to the very real grace of God in redeeming and restoring a person, not just to the community, but also to God himself, the purpose for which that hope was given. You who have stood so close to the fire know in whom you have found recovery to life. That's what it takes. Communities need to be reminded that not the best tax base in the world will make a great community. It is a testimony to which every community needs to hear that our hope is in the Lord and not in ourselves. Church Army, now Corps, has not really changed. You are still producing evangelists. Every person who can say, it is not me, but the Lord, is an evangelist. And those of you who know it and must cling to it daily, you make the very best evangelist. That's why I always say Church Army / now Corps. I'll get it right, Gary. I will one of these days. Thank you so much for asking me here.
I want to apologize for that telephone call. I have these friends, and that was Brad Pitt that called. And I had it set up because, you see, our next speaker went to high school with Brad Pitt and also with Doug Pitt. And so I had asked one of them to call me, but I wanted them called later, so now they've already rented and everything. But that's okay. Anyway. Our next speaker is going to talk about family impact. And I've known Vince Blueball for quite a while. He did indeed go to high school with Brad Pitt and Doug Pitt. And one of the problems was they used to fight all over the young ladies that were in high school because, Vince was trying to get a few dates and Brad and Doug was just beating him all over the place and still do. But you know what? God had a special thing in mind for Vince. A special person. And her name was Candy. And he created Candy for Vince a long, long time ago. So it just took a little while for Vince to find her. Vince is married to Candy. And he's the father of Sam and Caleb. Vince Blueball serves here at Second Baptist as our missions pastor. He's a church planter. He planted the Bridge of Faith in Rockaway Beach in 2005. Former marketing executive, specialized in marketing with NASCAR. He did go to high school with Brad, and he's an avid aviation enthusiast. You know, every time that we fly together throughout the country or in the world, here I'm just trying to get on the car, or on the plane rather, and he's still Google-eyeing the plane out there to see what kind it is, and he can tell you all kinds of different things. It says here that he's a real good-looking dude, but we all know that's wrong. But I want to tell you about the Vince Blueball I know. Vince Blueball loves the Lord Jesus Christ with all of his heart, with all of his mind, and all of his soul. Each day, he preaches that to anybody who takes time to listen. So I want you to meet my friend, Vince Blueball, who's going to talk to us about family impact.
Thank you, Bob. Well, what a pleasure it is to be here tonight. Welcome to Second Baptist for all of you. It's just good to be here to talk about CORE. To be honest with you, I wish we didn't have to do this because I wish CORE wasn't needed. But it is. And normally when I speak, or just in life generally, I like to laugh. And I like to play jokes on people and shoot them funny texts while they're speaking and stuff like that, and try to do that. And I tease my friend Carrie, who I'm now calling Jesus because of the hair. And, you know, he does play in Branson once in a while in our adoration parade. But tonight's not a night for joking around for me. I'm going to tell you a story about a very pretty, sweet brunette girl named Dee Dee. And Dee Dee was born, like many of us, into a Christian home. And although that home later would become what some people mistakenly call a broken home, her parents loved the Lord. And she had a family who loved the Lord, and her family was in church all the time. And Dee Dee, up to a point, would have been what we call a good girl. You ever use that phrase? He's a good girl, or she's a good girl, or he's a good guy. Dee Dee would have been a good girl, and she was beautiful. Well, at 13, someone introduced her to the world of pot, and she began to smoke marijuana. As an adult, she graduated to harder drugs, and eventually, and by the way, there are no soft drugs, but eventually she found her way to meth. Now, Dee Dee got married, and she had 2 beautiful children. One was named David Allen, a fine young son, and she had a pretty daughter named Stephanie. Well, as Dee Dee grew up, and as she aged, she eventually lost her teeth. She was no longer pretty. At 40, she looked like she was 60 or 65. She couldn't hold down a job. I remember at one point Dee Dee weighed 80 pounds. She couldn't afford her meth habit anymore, so she began selling her body to afford the drugs. Now, as a child, anyone who knew her thought Dee Dee had been saved. But at one point along the way, and in all of that mess, Dee Dee accepted Christ as her Savior. And she became clean. And for 3 years she was clean. She gained weight. She went to the dentist and she had her teeth fixed. She began to hold down a job. I remember one time when she bought her family and friends Christmas presents, and everyone that knew her remarked what a miracle it was that Dee Dee, one, remembered it was Christmas and knew then to even buy presents for people that she knew and loved. The problem was Dee Dee raised her children in a drug environment. And so one night, her 18-year-old daughter, Stephanie, went out and was partying with a bunch of her friends, who one of her friends' dad was a pharmacist, and somehow that kid got a hold of pharmaceutical-grade morphine, and Stephanie, after a night of binge drinking, got her hand on that morphine and didn't know what she was doing, and she didn't take a little. She took a lot. And she went to sleep. She never woke up. And so, at 18 years of age, Stephanie was gone from the world, and Dee Dee had to bury her daughter. Now, Dee Dee had been clean for 3 years, but she couldn't handle what had happened to Stephanie because she blamed herself for raising her in a drug environment. And so one weekend in March of 2006, Dee Dee took 3 days and went on a meth binge. She purchased what's called an 8-ball. She went on a meth binge. She came out of that meth binge, and nobody knows what really happened, but they surmised that she was so guilt-ridden that she then went to her medicine cabinet, emptied it of all the antidepressants she was on and all the Valium and every other pharmaceutical drug she had. She took it all. And she killed herself. That was on a Friday. Didn't find the body until almost Monday. And I'm not going to spare you anything in this story. It's an ugly story, but she was so decomposed they didn't know what her skin color was or her gender was. And they had to bury her in a closed casket. She was only 42. Dee Dee was my sister. Dee Dee, when I was a young man and going into adulthood, Dee Dee was so bad and her friends were so crazy that even as her family, I wouldn't tell her my home address or give her my home phone number. She always had a cell number she could call if she got in trouble, but I traveled a lot and I couldn't trust Dee Dee and her friends not to come to my house, and I had to protect my family, and all of us had to do that with Dee Dee. Drugs took away my sister. Drugs took away my niece. Drugs were the avenue that allowed Satan to destroy that part of my family. I'm glad to tell you that Dee Dee's in heaven now. So is Stephanie, I hope and believe. And one day I'll see him and there won't be any drugs there. But I miss her now. It's been 7 years and it feels like it was yesterday. My children, my sons, will never know their Aunt Dee Dee. They'll never know their cousin Stephanie. There's nothing I can do about that now. At that time, there was no core for us when she was going through all that. We didn't know any of that. We were a Christian family that was blindsided by drugs and we didn't know what to do. I could never understand why Dee Dee wouldn't just stop taking drugs, and since then I've learned that it's so complicated from that. But I'd get so angry and I didn't know what to do for her. And I got to the point I wouldn't give her any money anymore because she'd just take it and go buy drugs. I'd go buy groceries for her sometimes. I remember having to take her to Walgreens and buy female hygiene stuff. And I said, Dee Dee, how insane is this? Stop. She needed help I couldn't give her. I didn't know what to do. My parents didn't know what to do. Our church didn't know what to do. This is why CORE exists. Because they know what to do. They know how to do it. Most of them from Carry On Down have been through it themselves, and they understand what's happening, and they know how to deal with those people. And if you think I could never be one of those people, let me tell you that every person in this room, the most intelligent, the cleanest, brightest person in this room that has the most money in the bank and the highest degrees and whatever is 60 seconds away from making a series of decisions that will lead them into a life of addiction. We all are. I remember a time in my life when I was in the back of a police car when I was in the Air Force, because I got a DUI when I was in the Air Force. And that was 25 years ago. And I remember shortly after that I had surgery, and I remember telling my wife I was in pain, but I told her to dump down the toilet an entire bottle of Vicodin because I knew it was getting a hold of me. And God rescued me from that. And thankfully it didn't go beyond that, but it happened like that. This is why CORE exists. Because Carrie and his people, Jim and his people, they can do stuff that we don't know how to do. We can't do. And it's our job to help.
Hey everybody, I'm Kevin. I want to start by saying that the pure fact that I can stand here and tell you guys this story is testimony of God's sweet grace in and of itself. And I'll get to that a little bit more here in a minute. I'm a little nervous until I got up here. How's everybody doing? Anyways, okay, basically I came from a great family. Okay, I had two parents that loved each other very much. I had two great sisters. Love, joy, happiness, very abundant in my household. I never wanted for anything. I had everything I needed plus a lot more. Okay? And basically, alright, I'll start at the beginning. I was, my grandfather, he lived next door to me. okay? And growing up, he was my best friend. And I was up there all the time. And when I was 13, 14, you know, I remember how carefree and happy it was, you know? And I didn't realize it at that time because of just everyday life. But my grandfather died when I was 15. And I was like, I lost my best friend, you know? And I didn't really know what to do. I had never been through anything like that before, okay? And it hit me hard. And basically, I had a hole in my heart. And the way I ended up filling that, which was right next door, amazing, was through crime, through drugs, through alcohol. I was diagnosed with anxiety disorder when I was very young, and I was prescribed a drug called Xanax. And to begin with, I took Xanax the way it was supposed to be taken. And it worked. You know, it did. It did what it was supposed to do. I started drinking with my friends when I was 16. And to begin with, I remember it was just fun and games. You know, I mean, it was something to do on the weekend. I could drink beer, and I could go to school during the week, and everything was fine. On my 17th birthday, it was when I smoked my first joint. And I loved it. I ain't gonna lie, I loved it. It pushed everything away, the anxiety, everything like that. It left me for the time being. But as it got worse as it went on. When I was 18 is when I was first introduced to meth. I grew up in Ozark, right up the road. And there was a lot of meth around then. I went to school with several guys who, their older brothers were cooking the drug at the time. And that kind of got me started into the world of hard drugs. I can remember when I was younger telling my grandfather, he died, he was hooked to a 150-foot hose on an oxygen machine for the last 5 years of his life. And I can remember him telling me, don't smoke, don't do this stuff, this is what's going to end up. And I told him, I'll never smoke, that's never going to happen, you know, and I swore on it. And then I started smoking cigarettes, and I started smoking weed, and it just continued from there. When I was 19 is the first time I started doing other pharmaceuticals, and I got hooked on Oxycontin. And to begin with, I wouldn't, you know, the only way I did them was to snort them and all that kind of stuff. And I told myself at that point, I'm never going to shoot up. I'm never going to use needles. And I can remember when I was 20, throughout this whole time, I started stealing, I started lying, I started cheating to my parents, to my friends, to my family, to everybody that cared about me, because I knew they wouldn't leave me. So I figured I could do anything I wanted to them, and they weren't going anywhere. But I can remember when I was 20 years old, it was the first time that I ever used a needle. And I can remember sitting in my room at my house thinking, I've done it. I've become the person that I said I'd never be. I've become the person that I used to hate, the person that I swore would never happen. And it just continues on from on and on. Like I said, I was stealing from my parents to buy drugs. I was stealing money from my sisters, from my friends. I was going out and stealing from houses, garages that, you know, wasn't even there. That nobody, in the middle of the night. And this continued for years. After the point that I realized that I was everything that I never wanted to be, I gave up. I completely gave up on life, and I went off the deep end. I did that for many years. About 3 years ago, when I was 28, I caught my first felony, which that was actually a blessing in and of itself. It was the least thing that I've ever done in my life, and I got caught for it. And I say that was a blessing. I say me being a felon is a blessing for the pure fact that any other crime that I committed, I would still be in prison today. But I was caught on this. And I remember telling my dad, we were on the way to court one day, and I remember he said, Kevin, I want you to get help. You know, he had been begging me for years to start going to church and to make God a part of my life. And I said, no, I'm young. I can wait for that. You know, I don't need that yet. I can do that when I get older. But I remember him sitting there talking, and I seen tears in my dad's eyes. And he said, Kevin, please go to rehab. Please get help. And I told him, I'm never going to go to rehab unless I'm made to go. And at the time, I thought that was the worst thing I'd ever said. Okay, because a few weeks later, he pressed charges on him. See, my grandma had passed away several years before that, and she'd left quite a bit of money to me. And the only thing I did, so they gave me checks. It went into their account. And they gave me checks and said, go ahead and get what you need. You know, and I did, but I spent it all on drugs. And the thing is, when those checks ran out, I wasn't done. You know, so I started stealing the checks from them. And I was breaking into their safe, and I was taking their checks. I was taking my mom's prescription pills. I was taking everything from them. But that was the one thing my dad needed, and it blew my mind. But the one felony I got today was because my dad pressed charges on me for doing that, for stealing the checks from him. And That was a blessing from God right there. You know, because if I never had that, if I would never got caught, if I would never got in trouble, I would have never had a reason to change. And I would stay in that same cycle until I died, you know. And about 3 years ago, I got on probation. You know, they've worked it out for SIS. I had a great, you know, they fixed it all up before it ever happened. And 3 months into probation, I got caught for a DUI. So I went to prison. Well, first they sent me to treatment at LSRC. Shortly after that, I went to Church Army in Branson. This was in 2010. And at that point, really, I knew who God was, but I didn't feel worthy. I thought that all these things that I'd done in my life made me worse than everybody else, that I couldn't be forgiven. But in Psalm 136, it says that His love endures forever. And I want you to remember that, okay? Because it does. It endures everything, okay? I remember when I was in Church Army, I could see what God was doing in everybody's lives around me. But I didn't feel worthy. So I thought it wasn't possible. So I basically, remember, I'd given up on life at this time. I didn't have any, you know, ambitions, any goals, any desires to become anything more because I didn't think it was possible. So when I went to Church Army, I didn't even give it a shot. You know, I'd worked the first 3 steps in treatment, and I thought that's all I need. You know, I'll turn my will and my life over to care of God. I can say that, you know, but it didn't happen. I never actually did it with my heart. So obviously it didn't work out too well. I was getting high the whole time I was there, and they actually gave me more chances than I honestly deserved. And that's because they really wanted to help you. They really want to help you, you know, and they did. And eventually I blew it. You know, I came home after curfew. I was extremely high, and at that point I was so full of myself that I actually thought I could beat a blood test. So I told them, yeah, let's go to the hospital. You know, obviously it didn't turn out well. And so on the way home, there was a guy there, and I got to mention this because he means a lot to the story just because I saw him again later, okay? And his name we called him Bob. And I can remember still to this day begging me to go to detox and come back. Just go to detox and come back. And I wasn't having it. I probably called him every name under the sun on the way home from there. And he said, don't do this. You're going to go home. He said, when you get in your truck, you're going to get a DUI tonight. He said, you're messed up. You can't do this. And I said, I got this. So I got in my truck. I drove back to Ozark, and I got a DUI. And right after that, that was the breaking point. They were sick of me. I've been in county jail for too long. So they said, finally, I went to prison. I went and did a 120. Now, I had this weird thing where every time I went to jail, I found God. You know, every time I needed Him, I'd call on Him. And amazingly, He helped me. You know, and this started to set in a little bit. However, every time that I didn't need Him when I got out of jail, I forgot Him. And I went on about it because I had this on my own. I didn't need His help. Okay, He got me out of that tight spot. I didn't need Him anymore. And that's what happened this time. As I talked to God. He helped me through the situation. And when I got back out, I turned my back on Him again. I didn't make it another 3 months on the street, and I was back in prison. This time I did close to a year. And the whole time I was there, I started reading the Bible, you know. And this time I was actually starting to understand more of the Bible. I'd read it before when I was a kid, but it was just words in a book. There was nothing to it to me. It was just something that you had to do. This time it actually started setting in a little bit. And I remember when I read Romans 3:23, and it, you know, for all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. And I thought, that's something, you know. All of us have sinned. That was the first time I ever actually thought about it like that. You know, everybody sins. I'm not the only one. You know, so at that point it started to kick in a little bit, and I started thinking, well, maybe there is possible. Maybe there is forgiveness. And when I got out of jail, I shut the book again. And through that whole year, I started out slow again. I was smoking incense and all the stuff that was legal, right? But really it's the same thing, and it led me right back. And then eventually I got my prescription back to Xanax, and past that, I started using needles again. And within a month, I was worse than I'd ever been in my entire life. It didn't take that long, and I was deeper in that hole than I'd ever been. And one weekend, actually, a year ago, come Monday, October 14th, last year, I was really bad on my parents. I ran out of drugs. You know, I needed something to get me through. And I still, to this day, can't believe that I did it. But somehow, in my life, I justified spending eternity in hell. And it's not just that scares me so much. Now, knowing what I know now, it's the fact that I would have been out of the presence of God for all of eternity. Because I've been into it with my parents all day, and they wouldn't give me money. We were actually leaving. Dad said he was going to give me money, and we were leaving out of the car. And Dad put it in park. I said, "What are you doing?" He said, "I just don't feel right." See, my dad is a deacon in this church. He's very, very spiritual. He's very in touch with God. And I've completely killed them up to this point. And he said, "I can't do this. This doesn't feel right." And I flew off the hanger. I went crazy. Called him every name in the book. Literally made him physically ill to the point where he almost had a stroke. And I'd given up. I lost all hope. I walked out to the back part of our property there. I went about 20, 30 foot back in the woods. I wrapped a belt around my neck, and I jumped out of the tree. I don't remember it, honestly. At that point, walking out there and doing all this, I basically blacked out. And I know now that was Satan in my head. I don't remember any of this stuff, okay? The first thing I remember is waking up, sitting on the ground with a belt wrapped around my neck, and my dad standing above me crying. And I didn't know what had happened. And I didn't until a couple days later. But I can tell you right now that old person that I was then died in that tree. He died right there. I didn't know it at that time, but he did. See, my dad called the cops, and they took me to the Marion Center and set me in there. And I can remember waking up that next morning, and there was a little old lady in her little nurse thing, and she had a clipboard in her hand. And I didn't know where I was at or anything. And I asked her why I'm here. And she pulled out her clipboard, and she proceeded to tell me why I was there. The night before, when I was in the hospital, before they took me to the Marion Center, I had called my dad and told him that when I got out, I was going to come home and kill them because it was all their fault. And right there, I could not believe that had came out of my mouth. And at that point, that's where I hit my knees, and I asked God to please save me from this. Help me. Take me from this. And honestly, at that point was the first time I thought I had prayed before, but I had never truly talked to God. That was the first time that I had ever talked to God. And you know what? He listened. Because His love endures. It endured all the other crap that I had done. His love was still with me. Okay? And so I went to jail because they were sending me back to prison. There was no doubt in their mind. I had nowhere to go. My parents finally said no to me, which was the first time that's ever happened. See, it's sad to say, but all they were doing was trying to love me and trying to be there for me. But it is true. You can love somebody to death. That's real. Okay? And it almost happened. Because if there's a handout, we will grab it. But I went to jail, and the whole time I was in jail, I quit praying for what I wanted. I just asked God to just let His will be done. I never used that. That seemed so weird to me before. When I wanted something, my dad would say, "Well, I'll pray for it if it's in His will." No, I want you to pray for it the way I want it. But this time I had given up. Like I said, that old person had died. And I asked God to just do whatever His will was for me. Let that be done, and I'll be fine with that. And lo and behold, 8 days later, it was the day I was leaving. They had already put me on the bus to go back to prison, go back to Fulton. And I called my dad because I was going to tell him bye, because I wouldn't be able to talk to him in a while. And the second he answered the phone, he said, "Kevin, you're blessed." And I said, "Okay." I said, "What's going on, Dad? You got to tell me." He said, "You're blessed." I said, "Dad, you got to tell me this. This isn't what's going on." He said, "You're going back to church army." Now, my first thought was, nah, that can't be true. Not after what I did the first time I was in church army. They would never have me back. And he said, "No, it is." He said, "They're going to let you come back." And I hit my knees in Depot, at Greene County Jail, with 160 inmates, and bawled my eyes out because I couldn't believe it. Right there was an answer to a prayer. He was giving me another chance. And so I got to church army, and the first thing I did before I got there was I threw away my prescriptions. I called and had them all canceled. And I knew right there something was different about me, because that's not the way. When I went to Branson, the first thing I did was go and get my prescriptions filled. So to get rid of them, that was a big change. But I came in, and Earl was the first guy I seen. See, Earl was he's also my sponsor, by the way, and I owe him a lot. He's guided me through this path of recovery. But Earl was the first one I seen. And everybody in the center that day thought I was high because I had this big, deer in the headlight look on my face. But I was just amazed by God's grace at that point. I couldn't believe what was going on. Over this year since I've been here, I've got my family back. I've earned back some of the trust. Now I don't expect to ever get back all of it, but I've got back a lot of the trust. I've got my sisters back. I've got friends now that were in my addiction with me that are calling me and asking me how to pray. I've got other people. I've worked 3 jobs. I've had 3 great jobs during the time that I've been here. I've met tons of people. I can look out here in this crowd right now and I can see numerous people that I can actually call my friends. That's new to me. I never had that before. I never had people that I could look, and say, that's my friend. I actually care about you. I can do that now. There was sorry, I got to get my phone real quick. This is my portable Bible. But Jeremiah 29:11, it says, "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future. Then you will call on me and come and pray to me, and I will listen to you. You will seek me and find me when you seek me with all your heart. I will be found by you, declares the Lord, and I will bring you back from captivity." I can remember reading that in prison and thinking, all right, this means I get out of jail, right? But now when I read that, I see something completely different. Jail, prison, that's not captivity. The true captivity is the chains that are wrapped around you. Sin, okay? Being captive in your mind, being captive in your head. And I know now the prison means nothing, but the living death that I was living, I was praying to die. Literally, I was asking God to take me away. And now, I'm so happy to be alive. See, all of this said, the great thing about all this is, through all the isolation, the running, the depression, the unhappiness, the pain, the suffering that I put on myself, that I endured throughout this whole 15 years of addiction that I had, I would go through every last second of that again, just to get to the place I am now. Just to have God in my heart like I do now. It is amazing to be able to honestly look out at you guys and say that I've given my will and my life over to the care of God. And I have. And He's going to continue to lead me forward. I just want to say, if there's anybody in this room tonight, or if you know anybody that has ever been in that point where they don't feel worthy of God's love, please use any of this to help them. Because if anything that I've suffered or been through can help one single person, it's worth it. Okay? And in closing, I want to go ahead and read a prayer that it was actually in the letter that Paul wrote to the Ephesians. Let me pull it up real quick. And I love this a lot. And it really spoke to me when I read it the first time. And I think that, it says, I keep asking that the God of our Lord Jesus Christ, the glorious Father, may give you the spirit of wisdom and revelation so that you may know Him better. I pray that the eyes of your heart may be enlightened in order that you may know the hope to which He has called you, the riches of His glorious inheritance in His holy people. It is incomparably great power for us who believe. Thank you.
Thanks, Kevin. This evening you all have heard from Vince as he shared about how his family was impacted, not because of his addiction, but because of an addiction within his family. Kevin just shared about how his family was impacted because of his own addiction. We could sit here all night long. I don't want to keep you guys here until daylight and share with you the lives in this room that have been affected by addiction and how God has transformed so many lives sitting in this room. So in order to sum it up, we have a way to do that, and that is through our cardboard testimonies. So just enjoy as you see these lives of the orange shirts, as we've been calling them, as they've been transformed.
this prisoner and say to me, son, stop fighting a fight that's already been won. I am redeemed. You set me free. So I'll shake off these heavy chains, wipe away every stain. I'm not who I used to be. I am redeemed. But when I hear you whisper, child, lift up your head, I remember, oh God, you're not done with me yet. I am redeemed. You set me free. So I'll shake off these heavy chains, wipe away every stain. I'm not who I used to be. I am redeemed. Seems like all I could see was a struggle. Haunted by the ghost that lived in my past. Bound up in shackles of all my fears. Wondering how long is this gonna last? But look at this prisoner and say to me, son, stop fighting a fight that's already been won. I am redeemed. You set me free. So I'll shake off these heavy chains, wipe away